A record store sells rock albums and jazz albums. In total, the store sold albums to 20 customers today. 13 customers bought rock albums. 12 customers bought both rock and jazz albums. How many customers bought jazz albums? So it's a word question. There's a couple things we want to always keep in mind when doing a word question. We don't want to add to the question. It mentions rock albums and jazz albums. Don't start assuming that there's a whole bunch of techno albums that nobody's bothered to mention. If there's only rock and jazz mentioned in the question, assume that that's all the store sells. Okay? Additionally, don't be adding words to a question. They say at the end, how many customers bought jazz albums? Okay? Well, they're not saying only jazz, so you could buy a jazz album and a rock album and still be a customer who bought jazz. If they wanted only jazz, they would have said only jazz albums. Okay? If that's not there, don't add it in on your own. Okay? Take questions very literally. All right, so if that's the case, what can we do here? Well, we could start making some sets. Okay, we've got 13 customers in the rock album set, so we might name a set here R, the set of customers who bought rock. And they mentioned jazz as well, so we could have the customers who bought jazz. And they also mentioned that there are 12 customers who buy both rock and jazz albums. Now, if you're a little uncomfortable with sets, you might, okay, I understand you customers who bought rock, customers who bought jazz. I'll make a new set, B, for the customers who bought both. And you absolutely can do this, but then you're a little stuck in the question. We know that 13 people bought rock, and 12 people bought both. And what do we want? We want the number of people who bought jazz. Except I don't understand a relationship between these numbers and the number we're asked for. Okay? And so this can be a problem if you introduce sets when there don't need to be any. Yes, you can talk about the set of customers who bought both, but it doesn't need its own symbol. Okay? It's rock intersect jazz. This is what we use our set operations for. There's also another set that they're talking about. Okay? We know that it's 20 customers today. Okay? And we know we've sold 20 albums to customers today, and that there are only rock and jazz. So what type of albums could those 20 customers have bought? Well, rock or jazz or maybe both. So instead of thinking this necessarily as a universal set, which some people do, we could instead realize, yes, it's the universe of things we're talking about. We're talking about customers who bought albums, so that is the universal set, but it's also the people who bought rock or jazz or both. So in addition to being a universal set, it's also a union. And we want to get comfortable being able to read this stuff and be able to recognize that, oh, I can make this set from those sets. Oh, yes, this is a universal set, but it also has this relationship. Because if we can recognize the set operations, then we can use formulas. Okay? Now, with union, intersection, there's a great formula for these. Okay, that relates all of the 4 of these set sizes. Now the question tells us 20 people bought albums today, and we know that they must have bought rock or jazz. We know 13 people bought rock, that's in the question. The number of people who bought jazz albums, that's what we're trying to find currently. Okay, that's what the question's asking for. And it's always a good idea to, once you've got your sets laid out, to be able to say, I want this. I want the size of this set here. Okay, so we want the number of people who bought jazz. And the people who bought both rock and jazz was 12. So now if we simplify, 13 minus 12 is 1. 1 plus our unknown number of jazz customers. Subtract 1 on both sides. That should be equal to 20. So 20 minus 1, we get 19. Must have been the size of J. So that must be the people who bought jazz albums. So 19 bought jazz. Now, if the question had asked for only jazz, we could then say, well, that's going to be jazz and not rock. And we could use another formula to work out that there's only 7 people who bought just jazz. But we don't add to questions. So the answer here is going to be 19.